You good?
Yeah, let's drop that down.
This. Mike Church, take one.
Okay, if we could just kind of start off by, if you want to sort of explain why you're here and what you're going to be talking about this evening.
I am here because I was invited by Caleb Leverett, who is putting the show on. And Caleb is a listener to the Mike Church show on the Sirius XM Patriot radio channel. And he's a big fan. So much so that a movie that I made about 1776, the logo of the film is the 7-6, set in Courier basically, and it sets the 7 and 6 apart in a certain way. Anyways, he has it tattooed on his forearm. That's the logo from the movie. So Caleb's a big fan, and he knew I participated in the LibertyFest event in New York City in September, and when he decided to have this one, he asked if I would make an appearance, and of course I cheerily agreed, and here we are. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about, the title of tonight's speech is Drawing a Lines, is Lines in the Sand is what the title is. And I'm going to ask the question of the audience and anybody that's listening or watching, where do you draw the line? Or is there a line to be drawn? And I'm going to give some examples of where lines in the sand have been drawn in the past, like in 1776, for example. And most people don't know the whole story of where the guys that we would call, the men we would call founding fathers, even though they didn't call themselves that, where the line was for them. And where they would draw the line in the sand, and across the line, if you crossed, then they took action. And I think one of the things that we don't do very well, especially amongst the conservative movement. Some of us here are conservatives, some are anarchists, some are libertarians, but speaking for the conservative movement, it hasn't conserved an awful lot, and I think one of the reasons is, if not the chief reason, is it won't draw lines. And when it does draw a line, when the line is breached, when someone crosses the line, there's no repercussion, there's no action is taken. And I don't mean picking up weapons and shooting people. I just mean that taking the hard line stance that if you do that, we're not going to obey, so don't do it. So the speech is about drawing a line in the sand, giving some historical examples of where men in the past drew the line. And quite surprisingly, I mean, the line that was drawn in the sand in 76 was for things that our city councils do to us every day. We have dog catchers that are less violating that violate liberties less than the British did, and what some men in the 1770s felt was just too far. So that's the goal is to just ask the question, will you draw a line? And if you will, where is the line? And if somebody crosses it, what will you do about it?
Is this your first time visiting the West Texas area here?
I have never been to West Texas before.
Have you been to Texas?
I have been to Texas.
Because you know of the line at the Alamo is what all Texans are going to think first when you talk about.
That's a great example. You know, I hadn't even thought of that. My favorite Texas story is actually the Battle of San Jacinto. Not the one where Sam Houston, but the battle that happened and I might be getting the river wrong, but it happened on the Sabine River, where the Texas Guard, the 8 men that were left in a bar, basically defended the Sabine Pass against a encroaching fleet of Union ships.
Since we're going to be interviewing several different people, there'll be these sort of certain themes that will be common, and also some that will sort of be divergent, because everybody's being drawn to what's the liberty movement, or whatever you want to call it, for different reasons, and a lot of them are very personal, and some of them are like, for here, we were at a barbecue last night, people were talking about the oil companies,
yes,
and how it's intruding on their livelihood and their family's health. So if maybe you could kind of talk a bit about that this is an umbrella that people from completely divergent sort of ideologies can get together under. And so if you want to talk about maybe the differences among some of the people that might be in the audience tonight.
For me, the reason that, number one, the reason that I'm here is because this is a living. This is how I monetize my skills. That's number one, but that's not the reason why. I mean, if I didn't do that, I think I would probably do what I'm doing. But for me, the reason that I come to events like this, and if I came as a participant, for me it's civilizational. What's going on today, and I believe that this is just a never-ending struggle. I do not believe that there was ever a time when there was just peace and tranquility and everyone was happy and there was gumdrops and streets paved with gold and what have you, and that there was total tranquility and contentedness. Men, and even especially American men, have always had problems and issues with their governments, regardless of whether they were local, federal, or state. They always have, and that struggle continues to this day. And I think that the difference today is that we have a federal government, or as it should be called, a general government, that is so large, so intrusive, and so offensive in the manner in which it discharges that it shovels out its tyranny with just reckless abandon, almost as though there is nothing anyone can do or say to stop it. That is to me is a civilizational threat. If you don't address that threat, and if you don't, as you address it, provide reasons why that threat needs to cease, well then some of us think you go the way of empires. You go the way of the Roman Empire, you go the way of the Ottoman Empire, you go the way of the Chinese. Once upon a time the Chinese did rule the West, the western part of the Asians. If we don't stand up, and really that's why the speech is called Lines in the Sand again, if we don't make stands and decide that, okay, this is not good for the future, this is a civilizational struggle here, and if we don't get some of this stuff right, there's not going to be a civilization. There certainly won't be one that resembles what we had today. Then I think that is something that you can organize around. If there's a threat, an imminent threat to your existence, I think people, whether they're libertarians, anarchists, even progressive liberals, I tell my audiences on my radio show and in speech tonight, I'll actually address this. We have a lot in common with our progressive brothers and sisters. We don't agree on everything for certain, and there may be just a few things, but they're fundamental. You know, our progressive liberal friends are by nature, and they used to be until their guy's in office, but by nature they're anti-war. They're non-interventionists for the most part. They believe in individual liberties to a certain extent and defending those liberties. So we have things in common that I think, as I said, all those different ideological spectrums can come together and can find some common ground. And I would think that preserving the civilization is one of those common ground things. Like we heard last night about the oil companies doing what they're doing with the mineral rights here in West Texas. I mean, that's not a civilizational threat, that's a threat to private property. But some may argue that, well, a threat to private property is a civilizational threat. If you don't have real private property rights, then you really don't own your property. And the problem is also with that, you may own your private property for a lot, you may have been able to purchase it for a lot less because you didn't buy the mineral rights. And you know, at the time that you didn't do that you decided not to do that, that may have seemed like a wonderful idea, but now in hindsight it doesn't look so good. But I think that all those things can bring people together to think, okay, regardless of why the deals were made, we need to preserve this man's private property rights, and that's just one of the factions or one of the groups or one of the things that people have a complaint or an issue with, that I think most people in that room last night agree that, yeah, that's a valid complaint that needs to be addressed. So you come to these events and you hope that you make friends, network, and that you take something away that you think maybe everyone agreed with, and then you build on it.